The Dred Scott case, origins. Dred Scott was a slave who lived in Missouri. When his first master died, an army surgeon named Dr. John Emerson took Scott first to Illinois and later to the Wisconsin Territory. Neither Illinois or Wisconsin allowed slavery under the terms of the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. After Emerson's death, his widow farmed out Scott and his wife to another army captain who returned them to a slave state. Scott offered Mrs. Emerson $300 for his freedom, but she refused. Scott filed a lawsuit stating that since he had lived for several years where slavery wasn't permitted, he should be granted his freedom. Historians are uncertain as to why Scott waited until he had again moved to slave territory to file his lawsuit, though some think he simply hadn't known his rights at the time. Others suppose that Scott had been satisfied working for Dr. Emerson and did not consider suing for his freedom. In a lower court, Scott originally lost his case on a technicality. He couldn't prove that he was legally owned by Dr. Emerson's widow. However, he refiled the lawsuit and won. The Missouri Supreme Court subsequently overturned the verdict. Scott filed his suit in federal court, but the Missouri Supreme Court decision was upheld. Finally, Scott and his lawyers appealed to the United States Supreme Court. The Dred Scott case decision. The resulting Supreme Court decision in the case of Dred Scott versus Sanford became one of the court's most controversial rulings. Many historians and political scientists believe that the decision made the Civil War inevitable. In the 6-3 decision, Chief Justice Roger B. Taney delivered the majority opinion. As a slave, Dred Scott did not have U.S. citizenship. Since he was not a citizen, Dred Scott had no right to sue in U.S. courts. Therefore, his lawsuit was invalid. If Taney had stopped there, the case would most likely have been forgotten. However, Taney, a strong supporter of slavery, added that under no circumstances could Congress prohibit slavery in a territory because to do so would violate the Fifth Amendment's property clause. Therefore, all congressional attempts to limit slavery, including the Missouri Compromise, were unconstitutional. The dissenting justices believed that the Constitution gave Congress the power to make rules to govern U.S. territories. As such, Congress did have the right to limit slavery. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution outlawed slavery in 1865, while the 14th Amendment guaranteed citizenship to all persons born in the United States, including former slaves, in 1868. Scott enjoyed neither protection, but shortly after the Supreme Court decision, his original masters bought his freedom, as well as that of his wife and children. Dred Scott died a few months later. The Emancipation Proclamation. The Civil War began badly for Union forces. While President Abraham Lincoln had consistently stated that the war was being fought to preserve the Union and not to end slavery, he became increasingly aware that keeping up Northern morale would require an even higher purpose to rally around. He decided to change his position and issue an edict emancipating the slaves. Lincoln felt that doing this after several defeats on the battlefield would make it seem like the last gasp of a defeated government. Announcing it after a victory, however, would be perceived as a humanitarian act by a strong nation. The Battle of Antietam, September 1862, did not bring the North a decisive victory, but it carried enough weight for Lincoln to make his proclamation. The slaves of any state still in the Confederacy as of January 1st, 1863, would be freed. However, the Emancipation Proclamation did not free all slaves. Lincoln never intended for it to apply to the border states that remained in the Union yet continued to allow slavery, or to Confederate territory under Union control. Moreover, any Confederate state returning to the Union would be allowed to keep its slaves. No Confederate states returned to the Union during the war. At any rate, the proclamation remained more or less unenforceable except when Union forces freed slaves as they moved through an area. Therefore, the Emancipation Proclamation did in no sense abolish slavery. However, it did represent an important step towards ending involuntary servitude in the United States. The Civil War Amendments. In the period after the Civil War, the so-called radical Republicans in Congress submitted 3 amendments to the United States Constitution, all of which were designed to guarantee equal rights for freed slaves. The 13th Amendment, ratified in 1865, abolished all forms of involuntary servitude, except in cases where a person had been convicted of a crime. In the early Reconstruction period, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act that guaranteed citizenship to all naturalized citizens or persons born in the United States. Fearful that the Supreme Court would declare the act unconstitutional, Congress wove its principles into what became the 14th Amendment, ratified in 1868. In addition, the amendment guaranteed ex-slaves equal protection under law, forbade compensation to former slave owners, and barred most former Confederates from holding federal office. The 15th Amendment, ratified in 1870, extended the right to vote to all persons regardless of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. However, as with whites, only males had the right to vote. While the amendments appeared to guarantee the rights of ex-slaves, a conservative Supreme Court limited their scope and interpretation. In one case, the court ruled that the amendments applied only to the federal government, and that the states had no obligation to follow the same rules. Jim Crow laws. One way that Southern states sought to maintain a distinction between African Americans and whites involved a series of laws nicknamed Jim Crow laws. Named for a popular song, Jump Jim Crow, about a minstrel show character, they evolved from the black codes established just after the Civil War, meant to keep blacks and whites separate. Jim Crow laws forbade blacks to eat in the same restaurants as whites, stay in the same hotels, or even use the same restroom facilities.